Okay, we're moving on to community planning overview. Welcome, Oliver and Jose. We're anxious to hear your report.
Good morning, Chair Marshall and councillors. For the record, Oliver Ojako, Community Planning Director. I know we are going last, so it may last longer, but it's all good. With me this morning is Jose Alvarez, who is a Land Use Program Manager. We also have Ms. Chris Cook sitting here, who is our legal counsel when it comes to advising our department on GMA matters. So this morning, I will just provide counsel with an overview of what the planning department does. And by extension, I will also get into our updated project schedule, and then briefly talk about our 2025 work plan, which I typically come to the council around this time and asking for your approval. I must say that that is community planning, is the only department, in quote, that the council approves our work program. It doesn't mean that you don't approve the work program of other departments, but we come before you asking for your approval of our work program. Can we go to the next slide? So this is just a quick overview of my discussion this morning with you, providing you community planning overview, the comp plan progress to date, and then an overview of our 2025 project schedule. Before I do that, I want to go to the next slide and talk briefly about our core and support services, and followed by the collaboration that we engage with multiple jurisdictions, and then talk briefly about the policy, public policy process, where the council makes policy decisions. And after your policy decisions or directions, what I and my staff, we don't do advocacy planning. And what does that mean? Hence, the council provide direction. We come before you and prepare an ordinance or a resolution solidifying the action of the council. That is our role. I try to emphasize that to my staff. Sometimes we do push back when it's necessary. We tried that with the example of that is the Shelashi Bluff ordinance, which we came to the council as an example, asking you to repeal. And the council didn't. And now, of course, you know, we are in litigation, which that decision by extension is what put the county out of compliance with GMA. So in our core and support services, let me go to what is it that we do. Community planning is responsible for long-range land use planning for the county. My department, we, in collaboration with other local jurisdiction and other stakeholders, we plan for what areas, if you will develop as residential, for example, what areas will develop as commercial, and what areas should be preserved for agricultural or resource, including mining and so forth. We are required by state law, which I will get into later, to do that work. We also are responsible for a comprehensive plan update, just like we are in now. That is required by state law. Not only Clark County, but other counties that are required to do the periodic review, and we have a timeline of when that is supposed to be completed. The plan update, I will come before council, and I said it's going to take about 3 years or more than that. And folks always ask me, why does it take 3 years or more? I said, because there are so many interests, there are so many stakeholders, and there are so many issues. And that is why it takes that long. We have to do, there is a requirement in the state law that we have to do that update and provide continuous public participation. And we do that, including outreach. The Growth Management Act, which we are one of the counties required to plan fully under the Growth Management Act. The Growth Management Act is codified in revised, or what is known as RCW, Revised Code of Washington. You will hear me often say 3670A. That is where the Growth Management Act, all the rules and all the laws and all we as the county is fully required to comply with. That's where you can find the Growth Management Act being codified. We also, when the legislature passes new bill, it is my department that comes before council and says, we have a new bill that the legislature passed. We have to write a development regulation on how to implement that. And we also, in some instances, either through the request of property owners or interests, say like, for example, a church, I think we came before you on a code amendment to allow a church in the ag zone as well as in the forest zone. So we write new code. And we also are responsible for any amendment beside the biannual code update that community development do. We also are responsible for amending Title 40, especially where you have major policy implications. My department is responsible for taking on any major amendment to Title 40. Title 40, as you know, is the Unified Development Code of the county. We also, beside comprehensive planning, we also are responsible for doing some environmental planning. And that entails we are responsible, this is the community department, community planning department, we are responsible for the Shoreline Master Program. And every work that we do, whether it's staff report or plan amendment, we are supposed to review the associated checklist and make a determination of whether to issue determination of non-significance or mitigated DS, or in some cases, we issue a DS. So we are responsible for following the State Environmental Policy Act. Under the shoreline of the state, we are responsible, as is mandated, to also monitor development effect on shoreline conditions and demonstrate through the applications and development that occurs that what is happening is compliant with the shoreline of the state. And while we're also implementing the Shoreline Master Program. As Ken mentioned earlier, when I get to our organizational chart, you will see that I have a group of staff that do advanced transportation planning, and we do so in coordination with Public Works. What I often say before council is that we don't build the road, but we plan where it goes to support the land use that the council is approving. And in doing so, and in coordination with Public Works, we do have a capital facilities plan identifying all the new infrastructure to support the plan and where those future roads will go, and prepare a 20-year capital facilities document, and it is from that 20-year list that you see 6-year capital project that come before you from Public Works to approve. In the administration, we, in my shop, we are responsible for about 5 commissions, including the Planning Commission, the Commission on Aging, the Historical Preservation, School Advisory Committee, and it's my understanding from the Deputy County Manager that the Ag Commission that the council recently put in place, that my department will be managing that when it is up and running. So that will put about 6 or 7 commissions under my department. We also have other committees. They're not commissions, but there are certain projects that we do that requires technical advisory committee that the council approves. Example would be on the housing and the climate bill that we're doing now. We have 2 committees that are managing to put that climate element to comply with the state law requiring Clark County to have a climate element. We do all this work, as I said, with collaboration with multiple jurisdictions. We have about 7 cities in Clark County, so we do our planning with all the 7 cities on board. I meet with them during the plan update on a monthly basis. When we are not doing the periodic review, I meet with them on a quarterly basis just to coordinate, and it's required that we coordinate with our local jurisdiction, including any tribe that is in Clark County. In this case, we do coordinate with the Cowless tribe. As I mentioned earlier, there are so many stakeholders, and we do so many outreach. As we go through this, I will provide you our web link where you can go and see how many meetings and how many outreach we've done so far. And our website has a wealth of information. If you go through it and have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or any of my staff. On the public policy process, as I said earlier, we are responsible for preparing plans and development regulations that are consistent with the state law, in this case, Growth Management Act. And this is where the council comes into play. We will do all the work, do all the outreach, work with committees. Sometimes you will get majority report or minority report, but that is the work that we do before we come to you through the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has some role to play. Their role is to, on land use legislative matters, to make recommendation to council, and their recommendation comes to you for the final outcome. You can accept their recommendation, you can reject it, you can modify it, but you have the ultimate decision. And what I often say is that what we do, either writing policy or writing development regulation, we have so many eyes watching what we do. And why I say that is because when you see things that are being submitted into the record, if you ask me, I will encourage you read that, because what some who are submitting that into the record is for them to make sure that you read them, be aware of them, because they're also making that as a way to have standing, if you will, if they are going to appeal your decision, depending on what that decision is. So that is how the process works. And hence, you make a decision, particularly on Growth Management Act. I wouldn't say, but your decision is subject to an appeal to the Growth Management Hearings Board. And that's where Ms. Chris comes in to defend the action of the council. And if we are not successful, the growth board and the court can rule us out of compliance. And that has significant financial implications to the county. I'm not going to say how many millions we've lost in the past because we were out of compliance. Chris can speak to that. Let's go to my organizational chart. This is the next slide. Councillors, we are a very small department, about 11. During the maybe 2012 budgetary process, we lost 2 or 3 positions. We used to have a transportation manager. We eliminated that position. So you can see from this chart, all the work that we do comes from the council to the county manager, to the deputy county manager, translate that to me. And as you can see on the left side there, we go through the planning commission. And then you can see my position there as the director, and then the program manager. And the program manager oversees both the transportation and land use staff. And we have 2 staff on the administration side of things. And not to talk about my staff, but they are highly trained staff, highly trained, and often you hear staff, but they are highly trained and qualified staff to do the work. And on my admin side, they spend a lot of time keeping our record straight because we get criticized often about how we kept our record. The reason that is key is because that is the same record that are used when there is an appeal. And I must say that, and again, not to brag, that the growth board have looked at our record and call it one of the best in the state in terms of how we put it together. And they gave that compliment to our legal counsel. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I will briefly, before I turn it over to Jose to go over the our project schedule, I would like to quickly just provide you a high-level overview of our 4 phases of update to our compliance. So let's go to the next slide. So some of the council have seen this before. For the interest of the new councillors, this is our 4 phases of the update to the 2025 to 2045 periodic update. You can see phase 1, what I might call phase 1 is the project initiation stage, followed by shaping of the plan, review and refinement, and then the adoption process. The checked marked are decisions that have already been made or are phases that have already been completed. We started the project initiation in early 2023. The first thing we did was to have our council approve a public participation plan and a scope of work. The current council will know that we spend a lot of time hearings on population projections and estimate, to a point that we even invited our own demographer, county demographer, and staff from the Office of Financial Management. We invited them to come talk to us. That took some time, but the county finally made a decision on population to plan for. Similarly, we reached out to Scott Bailey when he was here, or we're still with the State Employment Department. He was the one that provided us the employment projection that the council finally adopted. And we went through a lot of hearings and work sessions before the council finally approved the allocation to our local jurisdictions. And as you can see, we're almost completing the phase of shaping of the plan. The last check mark there was the selection and review of the alternative to be studied in the draft EIS, which you passed a resolution solidifying the direction of the council. We are now in the process on that box. That's where we are. We are beginning to draft or look at our existing comp plan document and see what changes, clarifications, the new bills that have been passed, where do we need to update that? We're doing so not only in our comp plan text, we're doing so in Title 40 because the comp plan policies has to be consistent with the development regulations. So we are cross-checking to make sure that we are whatever we are updating, we make sure there is some provision of that in Title 40. We will then be moving into review and refinement when the draft environmental review is completed. We will have, and we will talk about that later, we will have about 30 days comment period. That is what is required by SEPA. The public has the opportunity to ask for extension to give them more time to review, but we will talk about that later when Jose goes over the project schedule, because we have a very limited time. I, as the SEPA official, may grant any extension for review or not. That process would then lead us into the selection of the preferred, and it is the preferred alternative that we will do the real major work in terms of preparing the capital facilities plan to support the plan, and then after that we will issue the final environmental impact statement and begin the public review phase of whatever else needs to be done. And then the last phase is the adoption process. You can see here that we have updated the last box. The reason for that is that the legislature gave us the county, not only Clark County, but the 2025 adopters 6 additional months, requiring that the plan be completed on or before December 31st, 2025. Jose will go in detail about the project timeline. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this next slide is really a high-level roles and responsibility of decision makers. I used to teach the county manager that your role is to prepare and present to the Planning Commission the comprehensive plan update, and then present the Planning Commission recommendation on those matters to the county council. This is consistent with the county charter. It is the county manager that present the plan to you for your final action. Of course, I'll be sitting here with her to do so. So, Kathleen, rest assured. The Planning Commission, as I mentioned, their role is primarily legislative because its members review policy proposal and land use changes and provide recommendation to the council. And you, as the elected official under the Growth Management Act, your role is very limited. You have the authority to select the population to plan for. You also have the authority to select the employment to plan for. Your authority also lies in approval of the plan submitted by the cities. That is the role of the county under the Growth Management Act. Of course, your decision, as I mentioned earlier, is subject to appeal. What I often tell my staff and others is that the county adopted plan is compliance until appeal. But we have to be very mindful on the type of decisions that the council make. You know, when I say that part of my role is to minimize risk to the county, that's what I mean. I'm gonna, with my staff, will come to you presenting plans and policies and development regulations we believe is consistent with the Growth Management Act or any new bill that the legislature have passed. And of course, you see the towns and cities, they go through their own legislative body to come up with the plan that they present to the council. Next slide. Now I'll turn this over to Jose, but before that, let me just give you a very quick rundown on the statutory deadlines that we have to be mindful of. Next slide. By by statute, as I mentioned earlier, we are supposed to complete this plan on or before December 31st, 2025. There is a 10-day delay for adopting ordinance to become effective. We are required by statute to submit our plan to the State Department of Commerce 60 days prior to adoption. And then, of course, we have to issue the final environmental impact statement also 60 days prior to adoption. And we have 30-day comment period for the draft environmental impact statement. All these are by statute. And by the county code, we are required to submit or required to do a legal notice 15 days prior to your hearing. So these are statutory deadlines we have to keep. So now let me turn it over to Jose to walk you through the project timeline, and we can talk about any questions that you may have. And I will come back. This is why I said my discussion with you might take longer. I will come back to our 2025 work plan. But before we go that, I'm available if you have any question before I turn it over to Jose.
Go ahead.
Chair, I do have a really quick question because you mentioned in the last slide under roles and responsibilities of decision makers, city, towns, councils, there are 7 incorporated communities in Clark County. So unincorporated communities, I believe Amboy is one of them, for example, they are not responsible for drafting a comp plan. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Amboy is what we call a rural center.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's also known as limited area of more intensive development.
Mm-hmm.
That is the language in the in code or in RCW. But here in Clark County, limited area of more intensive development are known as rural centers. Amboy is one of them,
Mm-hmm.
and Meadow Glade, and all of them are in District 5.
Okay.
Amboy, Meadow Glade, Hawkinson. I can go on and think.
And so the comp plan, the county comp plan applies to those communities? Is that how that works?
You look at it in terms of we are responsible for the unincorporated area that is not part of the city. So Amboy will be part of that unincorporated, will be looked at as a rural area. So we are responsible for planning for what happens in the rural centers going forward and following whatever law that is in place. I know that there are so many bills in the legislature now wanting to allow more uses, if you will, in the rural center. If that bill were to pass, I'm sure the legislature they will give us some time to implement whatever they pass.
Okay. And Dr. Odiako, one more question. Woodland, a
Yes.
very small part of Woodland is in Clark County, correct?
Yes, I forgot to mention that Woodland is planning with Clark County.
Oh,
so when I
okay.
say 7 or 8,
It includes Woodland.
it includes
That's what I thought.
Woodland.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, sir. Can we go back to what is on? Yeah, okay. Because I thought it was on the grid. Oh, okay. Okay. Let me turn this over to Jose to go over our 2025 project schedule. The only thing I will add, councillors, you can see that on the right-hand side, it says, please note dates subject to change. I don't want any of the dates to change, but I just want to put that out there.
Good morning, Council. Jose Alvarez with Community Planning. The last slide that provided those deadlines is sort of where we started working our way back to create the schedule. In order to comply with the deadline to have the plan completed in December, there's that 60-day notice to Commerce where we have to have the drafts of all of the items to Commerce. And so as we go through this, this is how we're sort of shaping this up. Where we are, so there's a couple of key points that I'll walk through, but that Commerce deadline, the draft EIS and comment period in June 1st to June 30th. And then that will start the selection of the preferred alternative with Planning Commission and Council. And let me get to that point, but those are some of the key items. Where we are now, checking in with Council, you've given us direction on the alternatives to studying the DEIS. Our consultants beginning that work. We're finalizing some mapping things with some of the jurisdictions, some last minute changes. School in Washougal being removed. So we'll be getting that to the consultant. We'll be working on coming to work sessions with Council to give you updates. We're starting work with the Planning Commission beginning tomorrow to start reviewing some of the goals and policies in the comprehensive plan. And so that'll be continuing on through the spring into the summer. Can you scroll down? Oh. All right. So that June 1st issue DEIS, that'll be the consultant's work coming forward. There's a 30-day comment period on that. And then once that's complete, we'll start the work sessions and public hearings with the Planning Commission on the preferred alternative. We'll be getting input from the cities. They'll provide their preferences on what that would look like for them. And then the EIS will let you know what the constraints are, if there's significant impacts to a particular proposal. The other item is the resource land study needs to fit in at this point also to help inform the Planning Commission and your recommendation on a preferred alternative. Since there are resource lands that are being looked at, that would be the appropriate place for that to be inserted. Question? Mm-hmm.
Where would that be inserted?
At the time that we're receiving the DEIS, when we start the legislative process on selecting the preferred alternative. So in that June timeframe, we should receive that.
July through August.
Yes. So we should have that in hand so that the Planning Commission can see that and help inform their decision on what they're going to recommend to you as part of the preferred alternative.
Thanks.
Let's see, we've identified council hearings in August, and we've put 3 consecutive dates there. We don't have much time, so that's why we're putting those there consecutively. We really need to have that decision made at that point in order to meet that deadline. Question?
Yeah, thank you. I do have a question on timing, and it's specific to the resource study. What I'm wanting to know is, because there's a lot of question as to whether anything can be done by that point, and whether or not anything we would have done at that point would be helpful, so to say, what the value would be to that if it's done so quickly. What happens in the scenario that we don't get that information in time?
A short answer would be that it will delay things. It will delay when we go to the planning commission. Will the public and the planning commission have adequate information to make a recommendation to you? As I said last time I was here before you, I am hopeful that we will get the study completed. What shape will it be? I don't know. I can't tell. But if there is a delay, it could really trigger us not meeting the deadline. But we will do our best to facilitate review, comment, and making whatever study come back available to the public and to the planning commission to enable them make a recommendation to you. And we're also looking at having a joint hearing between the planning commission and council. We've done so in the past, whereby you hear the testimony all at once, and then the planning commission, you go away, the planning commission deliberates separately and make a recommendation to you. So there wouldn't be any runaround to come before you in what they did to present something totally different. So that is the strategy we're trying to employ, so that, you know, you can be assured that you get the information that you need, and that will inform you based on what you're hearing and be able to make a recommendation to staff.
Okay, so could we choose to move forward if we don't have the information? Specifically the resource land study.
I wouldn't recommend that. I would say if it takes another week, 2, 3, I'll see what that look like. And as I said earlier, that's why I having the date subject to change, but I would like to keep to those dates. Unforeseen circumstances, we will adjust.
And if it's 3 months, 6 months?
I will come before council and said, with that timeline, we are going to be out of compliance because we're not going to complete. And I don't believe that the legislature will give us any additional time, even if we were to request.
So we would be out of compliance versus moving forward without the information. Is that what I'm understanding correctly?
Technically, yes, because if we're not going to finish, we will be out of compliance. You have to factor in that 3 months, if that is what you will require. If you give that 3 months and then you are close to the December timeline, if you're not going to get that done, you will be out of compliance because you haven't completed your plan.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if this is
Go ahead.
Councilman, because the study's not required for the plan, and I think Oliver has made that clear. I mean, we're doing this as council's direction for that study. But what's required is the deadline that we have to meet, and that will put us out of compliance. So whether the study is done or not, that doesn't determine compliance. It's only meeting the statutory deadline. And there's always opportunities. I mean, I think we have these updates every 5 years as well. So there is opportunity that if it takes an additional 3 months and we don't have that information, that it can help inform the next update.
Okay, that was my question, because I do have concerns about the time constraint on this, because to me it's about being able to use that information in the decisions that we make for the comp plan, but I have a much bigger concept for how we use that information and a lot more planning besides just the comprehensive plan update. And so I want to make sure that that study is done properly and that we have really good comprehensive information about our resource lands in the county. And so if it were, I don't understand the legal consequences at this point, but if we're faced between maintaining compliance or being out of compliance because we're waiting for that study, or just moving forward without the information, I would choose that at this point because I don't want to rush that process on the resource land study.
Yeah, and I think Oliver mentioned last week or the week before as well, is the last study that was done took 2 years.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been a lot of changes between that study and today. So maybe that's the reason why we can potentially do this study in a shorter amount of time, because there hasn't been a lot of significant changes that would necessarily impact it. But there are plenty of opportunities as the comp plan updates in future years too that can incorporate this study if it doesn't meet the deadline. And or if it impacts that we could miss our deadline, because as you know, if we're out of compliance, that could impact funding and revenues that come in for projects, grants, loan opportunities, and litigation, which also could cost us more money as well. So
Okay, and then just last question along this line. Thank you for the answer so far. If we were not going to get the information that we wanted, or we were in time, or it wasn't enough, and wanted to extend that time period, and we chose to move forward without that study, when would the soonest be that we could make changes that was inclusive of that information that we get after the process is complete? Is that 5 years, or is it sooner?
I would think that it will be later because two things could happen. Assuming the study comes back with a lot of recommendation and further study, if you will, or further programs, and the council agrees to that, if it requires a development regulation, for example, we are required to put that development regulation 1 year after the adoption of the plan. Okay. So depending on what the studies may say, take for example, if the study comes back and said the council or the county has to have a transfer of development right, if I may use that as an example, you may not be able to prepare that in a year or in 6 months. You can commence that work be done right after the adoption of the plan. You have the council will soon appoint the Agricultural Commission Committee. There may be some recommendation that could go to them to do additional work or whatever the case may be. So without really knowing what the study will come back with and recommendation, I'm hesitant to say with definitive answer what will happen. What I know is that our next scheduled periodic review, the legislature recently amended the timeline to once every 10 years. It used to be once every 8. So now they've moved the envelope to once every 10 years. So you cannot start another periodic review sooner than that timeline.
Chris,
Okay.
Chris wanted to weigh in here. Go ahead.
Thank you. Chris Cook, Chief Civil Deputy Prosecuting Attorney. The council could choose to move forward with its comprehensive plan review and update if the study isn't completed at a reasonable time, so as to fit within the required deadlines. However, the study is a necessity for the de-designation or redesignation of resource lands. So choosing to move ahead with the comp plan update without a study calls into question the council's ability to, take a piece of agri-forest land and put it into an urban growth boundary, for example, or to make other changes. however many surface mining overlays that were applied for. So yes, you can go forward without the study, but depending on what you do, what you'd like to do, that might not be a practical solution.
Just thank you. This is all really helpful. Just, and pardon my wanting to get into the weeds, I just really want to understand this. So when does the de-designation take place? Is that when we adopt the comprehensive plan, or is that a separate process that will happen later?
Designation is a comprehensive plan action. De-designation is a comprehensive plan action. Those are all comprehensive plan amendments. If you want to take something that's a piece of agricultural land and say, well, now it's in a city, that would be a comprehensive plan amendment.
Okay.
Okay, Counselor Little, I've seen your hand. Thank you for being patient. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I do have specific comments like the rest, but I would like to hear the rest of I would like to let them complete the presentation before I ask any questions. Is there more presentation, I assume?
Yes.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, let's do that. We may come back and revisit this. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's see, the preferred alternative, those August dates, we have consecutive hearings, the importance of getting that in a timely manner so that we can begin the selection of the preferred alternative triggers the final environmental impact statement, which is the response to the comments over that 30-day period, but begins the work on the capital facilities plan for the alternative that's going to be selected and the work that's got to be done by our partners internally within the county and all of the cities, and their work to make sure that the plan and can be affordable. Roads need to be provided. We need to have 6-year, 20-year estimates of cost to provide those services. And so that cannot really begin until they know what the preferred is. And so that will begin that process that is on an expedited timeline for them as well from that September to October to provide that information. We will then, as I mentioned, we're starting the comp plan text and review with the Planning Commission, and that's going to be running from February through October. We'll be starting with the work sessions beginning tomorrow. We'll take those goals and policies to them. There'll be amendments to most of the chapters in the plan. For example, the housing chapter has a lot of demographic data that's going to be 9 years old. So that information is updated. The meat and potatoes of the issues really in the goals and policies. So there'll be some text changes within the chapter, but they're not as significant as the goals and policies and those changes that are responding to new legislation, primarily the climate bill that's going to affect many chapters in the plan. Jenna is working very diligently on going through and working with 2 advisory committees to make recommendations to the Planning Commission and Council. And there are things within that are going to filter through to other chapters. And so that will be shared with the Planning Commission and Council specifically. And there's some new legislation through also the climate change bill related to transportation and how we measure our level of service standards, where the state's requiring us to do a multimodal look at our transportation, which is different than what is currently done. So there's going to be updates to that. Again, we're working with code changes, we're working with our consultant on housing for the multifamily portion. In some ways, we had a head start because we've done the housing option study and action plan before this comp plan started, and we happen to be very much in line with what the state recommendations were. So we were able to adopt some of those changes for our single family zones to adopt middle housing. So in some ways, we're ahead of the curve in that one particular where we're sort of behind on some of the others.
Let's embrace that.
Yes, we are embracing. So again, all of those changes have to be completed and ready for sending to Commerce by October 15th is really what it gets down to. And then we'll start the legislative hearings. And go ahead.
And just knowing that things can change from that date to the final adoption,
But not
but
Yeah.
hopefully not too much.
right. So adopting mid-December, going back 60 days is that October 15th date. And then we start the legislative hearings. We're having joint planning commission and council hearings scheduled, looking at November, back-to-back weeks, 6th and the 13th. The planning commission will then go off and deliberate separately, and then we will bring forward their recommendation to you, bring back that in a work session, and then have a final public hearing, and then the adoption on December 16th. And then there's some notice that we have to put in the newspaper to start the clock for the appeal period.
And if I could just step in, and I think I briefly talked to Oliver about this, and Jose, we haven't connected, but we may want to see if we can push that December 16th to earlier, because usually council's done after for the year, that first week of December. But I know it's really, really tight, but I know council will certainly do what they need to and come in if needed. But we could just see if we can massage it a little bit.
Keep your December open is what I would say.
That's exactly what I was saying.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen. You're absolutely correct. We will work with you and council to see what we need to do as we continue this work, because it is very, very, very complex, and we need the time. Now, looking back, we supported the 6 months extension, but everyone thought that we will be done before that 6 months, and here we are. So we'll do our best. We'll work with you. Let me go quickly to our 2025 work program. Michelle, I know it is on the grid. Our 2025 work program, or do you have it?
I think I
Okay.
can get that.
I won't take your time, councilors. Okay, quickly, councilors, this is our 2025 work plan. It is in 4 categories, namely administration, land use, monitoring and implementation, and then transportation. You can see each program, the description, and then whether it is mandated or core. The yes, no column is just after we present this, we come back to the council at a council time. And if the council approves all of them, we just say, yes, the council asks us to work on those. So I won't take much of your time. In the administration, what I would recommend, councilors, is go through this. I will come to you at the council time and ask for your approval. But just know that my department focus is to get the comprehensive plan periodic review completed. When after the completion, we will begin looking at what are the changes could, and we will open up the annual plan amendment process, which the council passed a resolution to put on hold. That is where individual property owners submit application to for plan amendment and zone changes. We do special projects. I must commend our admin staff. This is where we manage contracts, budget. I forgot to mention that community planning budget is all general fund. When we are doing periodic update, we go after grants. And assuming we are in compliance, we do get those grants. When we are not, we are short of that. Similarly, we go after competitive grants. So sometimes on shoreline work, sometimes on other work, when it becomes available or when the legislature puts out money and asks jurisdiction or commerce to award those grants on a competitive, through competitive process. So we do apply for that. We don't have any revenue per se, except when we do the annual review, where individual applies for plan amendment and so forth. That is the only revenue that comes through my shop. And I think the each application is $10,000 to go through the process, both the pre-app, the SIPA, and then the staff review, and going through the planning commission, the legal, paying for their stipend and so forth. That's why the cost is there. There are other areas where we could generate revenue, but that is something that I'm going to be working with the county manager and deputy county manager. The council did approve a code change that we made for review of application for developers agreement through my shop. And that developers agreement touches every department, public works, the PA's office, my shop, and community development. So I'm going to come back in the future and propose that there be a fee for review of development agreement. But other than those individual applications, when we open up the comp plan amendment annually, that's the only time we have revenue. But everything else is general fund. And in my transportation group, they are funded through road fund, because the work that they're doing is generally road fund dependent. So that's why in my shop, we have road fund supporting my department through the transportation staff, and then the rest of the staff is general fund. My budget have been hovering sometime below 4 million, a little bit more than that, depending on what the council approved for us to do. So I will come back, take your time and review this. I will come back at a council time, working with the county manager to ask for your approval. But know that all that we are doing this year is all hand deck on the completion of the comp plan. I will stop here and take questions that you may have. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate some of your opening comments about informing us about the GMA and advising us on compliance. You're at the epicenter of all of the conflicts related to land use. And I appreciate you reporting to us, and that includes you, Chris Cook, on trying to keep us in line with that. And I know there are many times that people aren't happy with the regulatory framework within which we need to operate, but that's the way it is. So thanks for your work on that front. So with that, Councillor Little, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for what you do in this presentation. And I'm looking forward to a work session with you to talk about the transferring of development rights and how that tool can be a parallel process that we use to look beyond the 20 years and kind of build the county that with the cities that we want to see way in the future, maybe 100 years or more. But my question is about compliance, and I'm a new counselor, so I just was curious, are there any areas where we are currently out of compliance and it's preventing us from getting any kind of revenue sources? What are those? And if so, are there opportunities for this new council to get us back into compliance?
I'm looking at our legal counsel, but I will add anything if I have to.
Okay, thank you for that question, Counselor. That's a biggie. The county is currently out of compliance with the Growth Management Act, as was ruled by the Growth Management Hearings Board. Excuse me, in March of 2023, and we've been out of compliance since. The subject was the placement of the surface mining overlay on approximately 330 acres of land in the North County near the terminus of the Salachi Railroad. And the county, as it has done in the past and in accordance with the judgment of the SEPA official, who is in this case Dr. Orgiaco, did not require an environmental impact statement at that time, reasoning that we simply lacked information about what was going to happen on the property. So the lack of an EIS requirement was appealed to the Growth Board. The Growth Board ruled against the county and ruled that the county was out of compliance. So since then, grants and loans have been at risk, and to a large extent, I think it is a matter of the option of the granting or loaning agency having been informed of the issue and the actions that the county is taking to try to come into compliance. Now, one of the things that the county did was the SEPA official changed the determination so that now an EIS is required. The Growth Board ruled that that was insufficient at the time. So the status right now is that in January, this the Growth Board's decision was appealed to the Court of Appeals, the State Court of Appeals. In January, the Court of Appeals heard oral argument on it, and we might get a decision as soon as a month from now, but I'm in the practice of not holding my breath for decisions from appellate courts. So what could happen? If the court rules in our favor, then we'll take that back to the Growth Board quickly for a ruling that we are not out of compliance. If the Court of Appeals rules against us, then we will have to look at our options at that time and come up with a decision about how to move forward. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. And do we have to let the legal process play out before we make any further decisions on that?
No. Although making further decisions would require notice and hearings and things like that, which themselves have, 15-day periods. You have to have 15 days of a notice to have a public hearing, and the public hearing would be necessary for this kind of action. So,
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would just like to know what our options are, if they could be laid out for us of various options that we could take and what the implications of those are and the timelines, because we are a new council and we could have different opinions.
I
on
would
things.
be delighted to come to you to discuss all the ins and outs of this case. That would take some time right now, and it might be more appropriate to do that in another context.
And if I could just add, as I understand, what the county would need to do would be to remove the surface mine overlay designation. That is the component that that is being appealed.
I have nothing to add to our legal counsel summary. I will only add that, as I stated earlier, that the work that we do are being monitored by many, and because it's land use, it's property rights, and when they're not happy with the outcome, they, if they have standing, they will appeal. And you know what? I'm not saying it because Chris is here. What we do, because it's subject to appeal, we try our best to work with the council and provide direction, not just because we are staff, but because we understand the law, we can read the language, we can read the text, we know what it says, and we try to do our work in a manner that we believe is compliant until appeal. That's all I need to add, but we rely on your decisions, and your decision is final.
And Counselor Little, I can send you the link as well, but council did have their first hearing for ordinance in July of 2022, and then they brought it back in October of 2022 and had another public hearing, at which time there was no action taken. But I'll send those links to you so that if you wanted to listen to that discussion, it's out there online.
Okay, thank you. I thanks for what you do, and I look forward to learning more.
Thank you, councillors. That's all I have. Again, in cooperation with the county manager, we will put our work program during council time and ask for your approval.
I think there may be a few more questions of
Sure.
council.
Okay.
Go ahead, Counselor.
First of all, thank you so much, Jose Alvarez and Dr. Ordiaco. Out of all the teams that we've heard updates on, it sounds like you guys have the tightest timeline, timeline, excuse me. And so I wish you the best, and we're here to support you. So thank you for that. This won't be the best time, but I'd like to learn a little bit more of the future of the urban unincorporated Clark County portion of the community. And so I'll send some times over to Kathleen and her cat, and maybe we can meet and talk a little bit more in detail. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. In the past, but this format works very well as well. We do have like one-on-one with councillors, and I encourage you to have a map of the land use plan for the county in your office.
I have one.
Yes.
A really big one.
I encourage you to, and it is very helpful. The land use, people say it's a color on the map. It means something. And that color helps and guide community development. They are the ones that do the day-to-day review of applications, subdivision, short plat, but that is consistent with the land use plan. So I'm more than willing to discuss with you in depth about what those colors mean and how we, all I can say is that the county council has land use authority in the unincorporated areas, including all the rural areas.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
You bet.
I'd also suggest, as we go forward with this process for the new counselors, maybe we can set up a meeting to, with our GIS staff to go over the vacant buildable land model, because it's a, it's a unique element of this, and having some grasp or understanding of that will help as we go forward with this process.
Perfect. Thank you.
And that wasn't even reflected on your calendar. That was 2 years of work before that. So it's
Correct.
maybe a
Yeah.
5-year process.
Yes.
I think there's still some questions that aren't resolved related to the resource land study. That to me seems like a very large wild card that's been tossed into the mix. And it would, I agree, and I thank you, Councillor Young, for bringing up these questions, because I think it could be very fundamental, useful information, but the public really has to trust that information, and it needs to be done in a very thoughtful way. Not that I'm questioning that you wouldn't do it in a thoughtful way, but it's just the time constraint that is so severe. So if there are, if you could think about it, maybe come back and advise us on what some options might be, just knowing that we don't know what's going to come out of that. And I don't know if that itself is a challengeable item, because then there we get into that 2-year scenario. So there's just so much uncertainty that has been imposed. And then the, do you want to comment on that?
If I can really quick too, I just want to remind council that the RFP is already out for that study. So if we're going to change direction, I'd prefer to get that direction sooner than later, because we don't want those corporations that might be interested in doing that study to put a lot of time and effort into it's yeah. And I think I mentioned that last week as well. So if there's any change, sooner is better.
The deadline and the deadline for submittal is February 19th.
It's
February
February, yeah,
19th.
it's February 19. If I may piggyback on what you're sending, if I am picking that up as a question, yes, and our legal counsel can correct me, that work could be challengeable. Why do I say that? It depends on what it says. For example, if it comes back and say that there are more areas that should have been designated ag and the council didn't, that would be subject to a challenge, technically speaking, because you failed to take an action, as an example.
It would also be subject to challenge if it's inadequate. In the past comp plan update, there were some studies that were submitted to justify comprehensive plan designations of resource land, and those studies were ruled, they were appealed, they were the subjects of appeal, and they were ruled to be inadequate. So it's not an assured thing that if we have a study, everything will be hunky-dory.
Okay.
And Jose, just to clarify, did you say the proposals are due on February 19th?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure if there's a desire to provide different guidance to you from the council, and I'm not sure, because this was intended to be a 15-minute briefing, if now is the time really to do that. I'll work
Chair,
with the county manager on that.
Yeah, so they were This was intended to be longer than the 10, 15 minutes. I think the 10-minute was just their general department overview. And then we were going to continue with a longer work session regarding comp plan update specifically. So the timing is not a concern. And actually, I would welcome any feedback or potential change in direction if council so desires today, if you can, or like I said, just because of our partners in the community that might be working on proposals, we want to keep those relationships positive for any other help that we may need.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I do. I feel like we're in between a rock and a hard place here. I really do, because I don't want to end up adopting a plan that's going to be legally challenged and lose. I don't want that. I also don't want a resource land study that's hashed together in a time period that it doesn't really give us the information that we really need to make truly informed decisions. I will say I'm a little frustrated at this point because I feel like there should have been some real alarm bells raised the moment we started getting requests from the cities where their only alternatives involved de-designation. I will say, being a rookie going through this process from the first time, it's just essentially now dawned on me the pickle that we're in, because I was always under the impression that essentially that was the line of my questions earlier, was I was not aware that de-designation takes place in the comprehensive plan update. I thought we selected the preferred alternatives and then there was a separate process for that. So that completely complicates things. I also want to be fair to the contractors. I think that is important. And so, to be completely honest with you, I am not sure what we do at this point.
If I think that there's agreement that this information, this study will be helpful, will be useful. It's that time constraint. And if it can be decoupled, if it's not part of the comp plan update, if it's something we undertake without this hard deadline, and then it informs us when would be the next time that we could apply this new information. If we were, is it a 5-year period? Do we look at things in 5 years? Not normally?
There are reports that we are required by law to submit every 5 years, but that is the buildable lands report that we submit to the state, which we look back 5 years to say how well have we been or how we've been developing, how consistent are we with the assumptions that we made in the development of the plan that was approved. That is required. That is section 215 in RCW 3670A. The periodic review or update, that is also in statute. That's what I was saying earlier, that now the legislature have changed that. Instead of once every 8 years, which was sooner. They did that during the recession. Now they've changed that back to once every 10 years. So you couldn't start earlier. There is no provision in section 215 that when you look back 5 years, you're supposed to do anything. They said, whatever changes you're going to make as a result of that, do it in your next periodic review. So that is the sequencing in terms of timing and process. Whatever we learn in that 5 years, we can then say we are going to make changes, because this have now informed us on what changes we'll make going forward. So unless there is a bill that the legislature will introduce, I know there is a bill currently in place but I have shared my view with my colleagues and through WhatsApp that that bill is going to be very challenging to implement, which requires that you can now expand the urban growth boundary on an annual basis. But it requires you also to do some de-designation and some other studies. I don't know how you do that, but that's just my view. I have been asked to be on the technical team to advise local counties on how to implement that bill. I think it's 5834, but I may have the bill wrong. So I don't think that there is anything we can do in the interim beside those provisions that are, let's say, the legislature passed. The only thing I can say, and I will repeat, is that if the study comes back and say there is additional work to be done, just very similar to what Councillor Little was getting at, if he comes back and said, okay, if you keep to your question, Councillor Young, honestly, we did alert the cities that they will be we are really concerned about them including resource land in their UGB. They just well communicated. I don't want to fault them because, you know, you look at this geographically, where else would they go? You know, so they made that decision, and some of these requests didn't only come to the county. Those requests, site-specific requests, was also submitted to the cities. So they're responding to that. But there are other areas that they could have looked at. That's their choice, going through their own community process. Having said that, if the study comes back and said, you know, if you were to include this because of X, Y, and Z, and the law says for you to have an ag designated property within your urban growth boundary, you have to have a TDR. That could be one way to say, okay, when do you put that TDR in place? I can say that those that have been here for a very long time, at one point, the commissioners put a group or a task force together to study the feasibility of TDR in Clark County. If we can find a report, I will share it with the council. That report didn't recommend that that they would like to see a TDR in Clark County. We came back 10 years ago and asked for a pilot program for a TDR, to a point that we had a consultant, Fonterra, who developed the same TDR for Snohomish and King County, came down here, sitting here, giving a presentation and a budget to do it. The council at the time didn't, or commissioners at the time didn't approve it. So it wasn't for lack of trying. And the TDR program have been in the books since 1990 to have a TDR program in Clark County as a policy, as a strategy, so that we don't deal with these issues going forward. But we weren't successful in pushing that. The study that Burke and Associate did when they looked at rural land study, there's a chapter that they wrote on TDR. Some of the recommendations that the council have suggested that the Ag Commission consider in their work, all those were all recommendations coming from Burke and then the Agricultural Preservation Committee. So we can do this if there is the will to do so. I don't know what the study will say, but there's opportunity. That's all I can say.
Councillor Little?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, there's what ifs with every single process of every decision. I'm worried too, but we made a decision that we thought we'd get more information from this than we have now, that it would be valuable information. And an RFP process is just that. You put it out there. companies, and you have goals and deadlines, and if nobody can do it, nobody will respond to it. But they have to comply with the deadlines, and that's what an RFP is all about. And I think we've made a good decision, and we'll be worried about it, but it will give us more information than we have now. I think we should move forward or continue on the same path.
Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
So everything inside of me is screaming right now because I've been saying this from the very beginning. I really don't see the comprehensive plan update as effective planning. It's doing what the state requires us to do. And here we are. I see this resource study as a massive tool for us to be able to do some real planning for our county, long-term planning. And like I said, everything inside of me is screaming right now because I feel like we may end up with a tool that is not what we need. So I have some severe reservations with moving forward at the speed that we have directed to move forward with the resource study. On the flip side, what does this mean for two cities in our county that we have we have draft alternatives, none of which include, or both of which, all of which include de-designation, that without having the resource study, we can't really choose as the preferred alternative. So what happens then? Because we essentially have options at that point that would not be on the table if we don't have a concurrent resource study available.
The alternative would be for those cities to develop more compactly and not expand their growth boundaries because it conflicts with resource lands. And wherever you find the resource lands, those conflicts will exist in the future wherever that land is. And it's intended to constrain growth, to grow more compactly, to preserve the resource lands. That's the point.
I think the other option you have is reallocating if they can't accommodate the allocation that was made to them, can another jurisdiction absorb that?
I think
What's the extent?
Vancouver was standing in line for
Yeah.
that.
What's the extent of the capacity lost by not including that resource land is, I think, one of the questions that would help inform that decision. And yes, we're talking about the adoption of potentially having protecting the resource land by allowing for denser development. The challenges we've been having, the state is requiring us to increase densities. Typically, that hasn't been received well in Clark County. That's the issue with having receiving sites for these protecting ag land. There's not a lot of areas that want to have that receive that increased density. That's always been the challenge with having that be successful here. The state is requiring jurisdictions to increase density. Jurisdictions aren't really going willingly. So that's kind of really the big issue in this update. And how we grow is changing, and the state is being more and more assertive, where it's been a bottom-up approach from the jurisdictions, but the jurisdictions have not provided that increased capacity.
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
I don't wish to portray this as a county versus city dispute, but when there is a question of expanding an urban growth boundary or not, it is in fact the county that makes the decision, not the city. One of the incredible ways that community planning works is by their very close relationship with the cities, by their communication back and forth with the cities, their, periodic, and I mean frequently, their meetings with the cities and so forth. And so as part of this comprehensive plan, of course, the cities have a lot of input into what they would like to see happen around their urban growth boundaries. However, in the end, it's the county that makes the decision. So I just wanted to put that in.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? I don't think we're any closer to finding the best solution here. Go ahead.
I would just ask for, and you may have already said, but just point blank at this point, with the RFP out like it is, what do you expect to receive?
Councillors Oliver again, we expect to receive responses to what we are asking the consultant to submit to us. And that is what I expect. And in that, we will look at whether they have the capacity and the expertise to do the work. We'll be looking at their scope of work and the timeline and the cost, which we will come back and share with the council before selection of whoever we're going to select. That's what I expect. As Councillor Little was saying, you put RFP or request for qualifications, you get a response back. You review that response internally. If it's request for qualification, your review will tell you, based on what you receive, whether the consultants are qualified, because that's what you're asking for, request for qualification. That is a little bit different from a request for proposal, because you're putting out there, here's what the charge is going to be, here's what is expected, and you see how they respond to those requests, and you go through the review and make your determination whether you have a good consultant that will do the work.
So would your recommendation at this time be to just leave it as it is and see what comes in?
Yes.
Okay, and then a hard question here. Is that answer so that we maintain our timeline, or is that in the best long-term interest of the county for planning purposes?
It's both.
Both?
Yes.
Okay.
I have, I'm going to toss out a suggestion here, and that would be whether or not we could narrow the scope of the resource land studied to just ag and not include mineral resources and forest. I can see Chris leaning forward. Go ahead.
You could. As I understand it, there is land that is designated for forest that is in one of the city of Camas alternatives. So if you dropped forest, you'd drop that.
What other, I mean, there's mineral lands, there's forest, there's ag. That's the extent of them, correct? So could we fine tune it to ag and forest with the intent that they focus on those prior to the comp plan update, and then they look at the minerals later, unless they think they can do it all? But to me, that would be, I don't know how this thing works. I don't know if they approach them completely independently. I don't know. I mean, it seems like we might be able to. I don't want to exclude it, because I do want to know the situation with the mineral lands as well. But if we could delay that part of it.
Just as I recall, Oliver, from you. One of the things that we've been waiting on related to mineral lands is information from DNR related to avalanche risk, which I think would be a good information to have when we're designating mineral lands. I think Councillor Little, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think we should be valuing one resource over the other. We've already put this out there. I also, of course, want to know about aggregate and I want to see the whole picture. So that's what the RFP is about. That's the day that we'll get back. We shouldn't exclude one or the other, put some value on one over the other, is my opinion.
I don't think it's a question of value. I think it's a question of timing and what information is still not available in that review.
Well, I get that intent, but that would be the practicality of it. We would be excluding some review over others.
My intent was to delay one over the other, not to exclude. So mineral land would wait until, because the issue at hand for the comp plan has to do with ag land and forest land. At this point, there's nothing in contention with, it has to do with mineral lands. And so it would be allowing the contractor to, focus on ag and forest so that they could get the information ready for the comp plan. And then as soon as they're complete and have that information to us, then they move on to the minerals and looked at that. That was my thought process behind that.
Thank you. Councillor Little, did you have further comments?
Yeah, don't we have site-specific requests that are specifically about mining?
Oh, I guess so. Those would be included because we agreed to do all those site-specific requests.
Correct. And the mining doesn't have any impact on any of the urban lands, but yes, the
Right,
site-specific
but the
request.
point of the comprehensive plan
Yes.
is really to accommodate the jobs and growth and
Correct.
plan for the next 20 years related to that. Councillor Fuentes, did you have a comment?
I had a question. Kathleen mentioned a while ago that there had been a study done a few years ago. Nothing much has changed. The consultants could potentially utilize that study. Is that correct, Kathleen? Is that what I heard?
That is correct. That and I just took those words from Oliver's discussion when he was before you, either last week or the week before.
Okay, and which study was done? Or what was the purpose of the study?
The study was in 1994.
Oh,
Okay.
wasn't even born yet. I'm just kidding.
Yes, the 1994 there was ag focus group and forest focus group and also mineral focus group. That was the work that the county appointed a technical advisory group to really take a look at the entire county and identify areas using criteria that the Department of, used to be called Department of Trade and Commerce, but now changed to Department of Commerce, CTED or something. They had a criteria that we have to use in the designation of resource, including ag, forest, and mineral. That was the study that was done, and that work was challenged. And the court came back and said that what the county did was right. For example, with the exception of one ag forest. But other than that, that was what we were referencing to. And that work, that group work was also included as an appendix to the RFP that went out. So that's what I was referencing. The other work that the county manager referenced and we've talked about before is that since that work was done or since the county designated those resources, any challenge, any inclusion of ag or forest during the periodic review have always been challenged, and we have not been successful. The only time some of the cities have been successful is because they annexed those areas prior to the court or the growth board ruling on them. And since then, as it may be, the legislature have tightened that opportunity to quickly vest and annex. So those cities no longer have that luxury to annex those ag or forest land quickly. But I cannot remember since 1994 any city including forest designated property in their UGB. Never happened. So that's all I can say to you. The last comment I will make is that in 2011, the council also put a task force together to revisit the mineral land designation based on the new information or updated information from Department of Natural Resources, their aggregate division. They updated the aggregate land map for the county, and that task force used that information to revisit the mineral land designation in Clark County. That work also took more than 3 years to complete. And since that adoption, that is the mineral lands layer or designation that we have today. As Councillor Marshall indicated, there's been interest to revisit mineral resource designation, but I have said, what is the new information that will prompt us to do so? We can only go to DNR and ask for an update. What we have been receiving from DNR is that that is not their top priority at this time. They are mapping landslide areas of the entire state because of the auto landslide. So that's their top priority. They will get to updating the aggregate. And they're correct. The aggregate deposit of the county doesn't change, really. But if we ask them to update it, they will probably reference the 2005 work that they've done. So that's really where we are.
Chair?
Councilor Rilo? Go ahead.
Yeah, Oliver, that's good information. So would you say that if we did not include mineral in this review, would it save time? And are you saying that they wouldn't find anything new? And so that it may be a good suggestion to not include that?
It is a conversation that I would like to have with council when we get the proposal. And as we are reviewing it, I'm going to look to the bright minds internally here to help us review that. And we'll come to the council. We may make a decision based on timing, what you may not like to see studied because of that. You can also make decision based on cost, what you would like to trim, if you will. So I will leave that up to the council based on the response from the RFP. If you ask me personally, because we're already studying the mineral lands designation request as part of the DEIS, if you were to leave mineral out, you may use that as a reasoning for not asking the consultant to include that. It's going to be your call. If you also believe that there is no new information, either from DNR or from any other source to look at aggregate resource designation in Clark County, that's going to be your call. I can only make recommendation to you, and you may agree or not agree with that. What I can say is that there is no requirement in Growth Management Act that you have to have a supply of aggregate resource 20 years. You will not find that in WAC or RCW. Some are misunderstanding that you're planning for 20 years. That's true, but there is no requirement that you have to have 20 years supply of aggregate. Similarly, there is no requirement in GMA that you have to have a 20-year supply of or certain acreage for ag or forest. No, if you don't have it in your county, why would you need to have a 20-year supply? You
Thank
will
you.
not find that, you will not find anywhere in GMA or WAC that says you have to have a 20-year supply.
Councilor
So there
Young?
would not be any
Oh.
potential challenge based on a decision to exclude mineral designation review.
A decision not to make a comprehensive plan change in general is not appealable unless state statute requires that change. So state statute requires that we do the climate element. If we decide not to do that, that's appealable. But I wanted you to de-designate my property and you decided not to do it. That is not appealable.
Sure.
Go ahead.
And this just comes to my earlier point is, are we planning to check the boxes off for the GMA, or are we planning for the future of Clark County? And it just kind of defaults to this doing what is required of us in the GMA. I would like it to be more comprehensive. So I certainly would support the resource study moving forward with it. I'll take your recommendation. Let's move forward. When we get those proposals, we can have further discussion on it at that point.
Okay, any other comments? I have one final question. And that goes back to, you mentioned that, and I think it was a previous council, maybe it was in 2022, to put on hold annual reviews because we're in the comp plan. But we have gone ahead with the site-specific requests, which would otherwise have been annual reviews. Is that correct?
Some of them, some can only be done through the periodic update, but there are, yes, definitely some requests that could be considered annual, would have been considered annual reviews, changing zoning from R10 to R5.
Do we have an idea of how many could have gone through the annual review?
We can, yes, we can.
Because
do
if
that.
we put that on hold, we didn't really put it on hold if we're allowing all the site-specific requests that could have been annual reviews. And I mention that because there's a fee associated with going through the annual review process.
Yes.
And so it would be interesting to me to know how many could have gone through that process. And I think you were saying $10,000 for each one.
Yes, that's correct. We can come back, but again, it will be us making some judgment and sharing that with you. But yes, we can come back and share that with you.
Decisions have already come and gone, but I think it'd be good for us to understand the implications of that.
Okay.
Okay, have we beat this as much as we possibly could?
Yes, and that's why I said when I come before you, it is very complex. It takes time, and it's land use and a lot of interest. So thank you for all your support. Look like Councilor Young has
Just
said.
one thing to add, and I really appreciate this back and forth. These issues are complicated, and I think we need to recognize that they need lots of conversations, probably more than we've had in the past. So when something comes up, even if it's not on the plan, get it in front of us so that we can talk it through as early as possible. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Chair, if I can just say
Yes.
thank you so much to Oliver and Jose and the team for every single time they come in front of us. It's always a long, drawn out conversation, but much needed, like Councilor Young saying, but just wanted to extend the thank you to Oliver and Jose for all the work that they do, and the historical knowledge that Oliver brings to the table is priceless. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. We never schedule anyone after you because we know where this might be headed. thank you very much. We appreciate you. We respect the work that you do and your willingness to tackle really this very difficult topic of land use. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we are completed our work sessions and we'll convene at 1 o'clock for council time. Thanks. Thank you, council.